Hello, America. I'm Robert Reese, and welcome back to the CEO Show. We're here today with Alan Lotvin. How are you, Alan?
I'm doing well, Robert. Nice to see you.
A pleasure to see you. And Alan is CEO and co-founder of Sequel MedTech. Now, of great interest to you, we're going to find out more about the company, which was founded in just 2023 and already is becoming a real dominant player in the market. And you're going to learn a lot about diabetes as well. So, start off, tell us about what Sequel MedTech is.
Sure. So Sequel MedTech is a company that we founded, like you said, 2 years ago. It was predicated on a technology um, that is a long time coming. So the technology that we have is called an automated insulin delivery device, and it's for people with type 1 diabetes, and we just finished our trial for type 2 diabetes. Type 1 is usually in children and type 2 in adults. And we set the company up because we realized, and the inventor realized, you know, 20 years ago that the current crop of technologies, while much better than injecting yourself with a pen, were not perfectly suited to this concept of what is called automated insulin delivery or an external pancreas. And we thought that there was a great opportunity to bring new technology to a market that had substantial unmet need, that has huge costs, both financial and health-wise for people. So we said, hey, fantastic technology. Let's combine it with some really interesting ideas on sales, marketing, and reimbursement. And off to the races we went.
Okay, so on that, it's so true that it's over $400 billion when you look at diabetes. But not only that, it impacts almost everyone. So I want to ask a two-part question. Uh, the first is, we know your career. You were, first cardiologist and at CVS, Caremark, president, and and from starting Sequel MedTech, within just 2 years, you've become a really dominant player in transforming the industry. So I want you to talk through the first part is what that growth was, how you achieved that, and what lessons you learned. But the second part is you're hard pressed to find someone anywhere who does not know someone who's afflicted with diabetes. So, anything you could say about the state of the union and the hope for the future of diabetes as a second part would be of significant interest.
Sure. So I'll start off with how did we grow so fast? Well, having it's a multi-chain problem. I'll try to be brief, but having to grow this fast, you have to have the resources to grow. And there's a lot of different ways to build companies. You can bootstrap companies, you can build for scale. And we chose to build for scale. In order to build for scale, we had to raise a substantial initial fundraising round. And in order to do that, we had to have great co-founders. So there's the inventor of this device, Dean Kamen, who was the inventor of the world's first wearable insulin pump in 1979. There's Pablo Legorreta, who's the founder of Royalty Pharma, who is incredible at financing. Bill Doyle, who's from J&J, and Maureen Toohey, who's one of the other significant operators within Dean Kamen's world. So we put together this group of people who incredible science and technology, incredible financial acumen and ability to raise money, and for me, a real understanding of the reimbursement system. And we were able to tell a great story because of the technology. And we sort of told people, we think the technology is going to do all of these amazing things. We think we're going to be able to get on everyone's formulary for coverage. And we think we can do this, we think we can do this. And it's almost all of those things have actually come to pass. So at each step of the way, as we got FDA clearance, as we started to build clinical data, as we started to get insurance coverage, we just kept increasing the customer facing parts of the business so that now I think we're in a position where 70% of our employees are either directly customer facing or revenue generating. And I like that ratio, but it required all three parts. It required a great technology, it required great financial support, and it required a team that could pull it all together and make it actually happen. To answer the first part of your question.
Now for the second part, diabetes. What is the current state of it, and
Yeah.
what is the future?
I'm going to attempt to be brief. This is obviously a topic that people have written textbooks on. But I'll do this quickly. The way to think about diabetes is there's two forms of diabetes, and they're actually quite different. And one way to think about it is there's insulin-dependent diabetes, people who have to give themselves insulin every day. Used to be called type 1, and it generally starts in children. It is the smaller part of the two pieces of diabetes, only 2 million people in the United States. Um, but it is a critical disease because it drives a lot of costs and it's a disease for life. And if you don't manage it well, and by managing it, I mean control blood sugars well early, the damage is cumulative. And so the way you control it is these systems called automated insulin delivery systems, which are an insulin delivery device like ours called Twist, a continuous glucose monitor, for example, Abbott's Libre or Senseonics, or Dexcom, and then an algorithm that tells it what to do. So that's type 1, right? And if you treat type 1 well, people can I don't want to say live a normal life because the amount of work it takes to interact with these to interact with your food and exercise, because everything changes your glucose. That's type 1. Um, and the goal there is better long-term control and avoiding short-term emergencies that result in hospitalizations and emergency room visits and can result in people dying. Um, Type 2 it's almost of epidemic proportions in this country and most other countries in the world. And type 2 diabetes is characterized, usually it's in adults, though it's more and more in children, and it's characterized by not a complete lack of insulin, but you become progressively more resistant to insulin. At the latest stages of the disease, you do become dependent on insulin in type 2 as well. It's very, very much related to something called metabolic syndrome, which is kind of obesity, hypertension, like this combination of chronic diseases, which are really epidemic in the world. Um, there are a new class of drugs. I'm sure as everyone's heard about them, called GLP-1s, Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro. I'm not going to list them all out. Those drugs both treat type 2 diabetes by reducing blood glucose, but also they encourage weight loss, which is another way of addressing type 2. So there's a lot of interesting therapies on the market and on the horizon for both types. We think we have the newest and best technology, obviously, for type 1. The GLP-1s are the newest technologies for type 2 patients, but the science continues to advance, and we're advancing technologies. Other companies are looking at how do you replace the actual cells in the pancreas that make insulin without having to immunosuppress people. There's a ton of work in this space because you made the point. It is one of the highest cost, most human impacting diseases in the modern world.
Hmm. So your niche of what you hope to accomplish, and we have about 1 minute left before
Sure.
break. Describe that.
So the American Diabetes Association in the last couple of years has changed their guidelines. And their guidelines say that for anyone using complex insulin regimens, meaning more than one type of insulin more than once a day, those people should be on automated insulin delivery devices. Currently in the United States, well under half the people who should be on these devices are. And of those who are, anywhere between 5 and 15% switch every year, which to me says there's a huge unmet need, right? If people are not using these devices or they're switching, they're missing something. And the clinical results,
Exactly.
while far better than jabbing yourself with a pen, are not as good as they could be. And so what we're trying to do is, again, every system is only as good as the weakest link, right? And for a long time, the weakest link was the sensor and then the algorithms, and now it's the delivery devices. We're bringing the newest delivery device. We're hoping to bring the whole chain up. That's the niche we're attacking.
And anyone who wants to find out more about you, what is the website?
Twist.com with two I's, TWIIST.com.
Okay, we're about to take a commercial break. When we come back, we're going to find out a little bit about how does someone take transformative moments and change a career, really three different careers that you built on now. So back in a few and we'll learn about that. Hi, this is Robert Reese back on the CEO Show, where we speak with the CEOs who have reinvented the fabric of America. We're here today with Alan Lotvin, who is the CEO and co-founder of Sequel MedTech. We've heard a lot about diabetes, but I want to ask you, because you've gone through really three major areas in your professional career that are very different. What was the key transformative moment that drove the change?
So that's a really good question, and I have a lot of friends when I talk to them about their careers, are incredibly planful and I would love to tell you that I am, but I'm really not. So what happened was I was an interventional cardiologist. So I used to put in stents and do all sorts of angioplasties in the New York metropolitan area, and I had a pretty big practice that I had grown. And I loved doing procedures. I mean, it's immediate gratification. It's a technical skill. It's a physical skill. It's a mental. It was a really gratifying career. And you could point to people who were alive because you were where you were at the time. But after about 5 years, 4.5 years, and several thousand of these, and was doing this when angioplasty was pretty new. It started to become clearer and clearer that the procedure, while effective in the short term, wasn't as good at making you live longer or live better as we had hoped. And so some percentage, and it's up for debate, but some percentage north of 25% of the procedures that were and are being done are probably not needed. And I had a real hard time thinking about how am I going to maintain a referral practice where people have to send me cases and not doing something I think was wrong. Because, Robert, you send Alan a case and you say, hey, go see Alan, he's the best. And Alan says, well, you know what? I don't really know if you need this. And okay, that I just really irritated my referring doctor. So that was one reason. The other reason was, quite honestly, I had done 2,500 of these, and the equipment was getting better and better and better, and some of the technical skills were getting less and less required. It was less and less challenging, and so I was on to the next challenge. And so that was a time when big data and population health management were the buzzwords in medicine, and I was intrigued. I had done some work in a master's program at Columbia, and ended up finding my way into the pharmacy industry because of the speed of the database and what I thought was the clinical rigor, because it represented what went into the body. And I found that I really liked the business side. And then I had one of those experiences where you realize how lucky you can be. And I was promoted to a role of the chief medical officer of a division of the company. And I moved out to Minneapolis. My wife was willing to move with me from the New York area. So thank you to her. But then I met a guy who's my boss at the time, was a guy named Glenn Taylor. And I reference his name because he's a fantastic human. And I said to Glenn, I really want a real job too, because the chief medical officer of this division he said, okay. And he gave me a $7 billion P&L to run. What do I know about running a P&L? Not a lot, but I was a smart, good study, and I learned, and that was my career. And I ultimately turned that into running several other divisions of the company in something called specialty pharmacy, and continued through until I finally ended up running Caremark, CVS Caremark, which was a $180 billion, 30,000 person business, and loved it. And I just loved the people I worked with, loved the team, thought the business was really an interesting business and how often it reinvented itself. And as much controversy as there's around the PBM industry, I will tell you that every study by the GAO demonstrated that the industry saved money. Anyway, why did I leave that? Well, after 20 years of working in various parts of pharmacy and the financing of healthcare, I kind of thought I had it down. And I needed a new challenge. And I really wanted to get back to the science and technology. And so I had been working with the inventor I mentioned, Dean Kamen, on a different project in home hemodialysis. Through him, I met Pablo Legoretta. We looked at this other device with Dean, and we said this is perfectly suited to this confluence of the three of us. And they convinced me to retire from CVS. I was retired for about 8 weeks, and then immediately jumped into something I didn't know anything about, and with a ton of support again from people around me, you know, Pablo, Bill Doyle, Maureen Tui, and my entire team, we actually built this company to where we are today. And I think we've made a splash. I think we're on the verge, going into 26, 27, and 28 of turning that splash into a tsunami.
So I do want to hear about that tsunami, but first, just want to ask you, when you go through those different phases on the continuum of your career, if there's any one lesson you learned about transforming yourself to add value, certainly jumping in and having to have a $7 billion P&L, that's a challenge very few people have from day one, right? What is the lesson that you've learned?
So the lesson for me, and again, it was a hard lesson for an interventional cardiologist where where let's just say the ability to have a large ego is easy, right? Because you're saving lives in an emergency situation, is to assume you know nothing and learn from every single person around you, and as quickly as you can integrate that into where what are the things that you uniquely are good at doing. And what I learned pretty quickly was the things that I'm uniquely good at doing is making decisions on very little data, decisions under uncertainty. It's probably the most important part of being certainly an interventional cardiologist. And
Well,
how do you
what's the key? What's the key to that? How do you do that?
that, my friend, is a very hard question. So I think the answer is I'm going to answer it in a little bit the negative. Most people are unwilling to make a decision when they have enough information for a variety of reasons. They're afraid of being wrong and afraid of being shown to be wrong. What happens is they then ask for more data. Asking for more data just allows you to kick the can down the road, or it confirms what you already were going to do. Because not in every instance, but in most instances, people will discard data that does not fit with their worldview. So the important part is, and this is the art, I think, of decision making, is knowing when you have enough. And depending on the gravity of the decision, that should drive how much you need to know. If it's a decision that's easily undone, fine. You don't really need a lot of information. If it's a decision that's going to be a real problem, you may have to make a decision under very little information, but you better have a plan B ready to go. And that you don't have to think about. So it really is an art form, and I think it's something that gets honed in physicians, among other decision makers. So that was, I think, the critical for me was approach things, as Einstein would have said, like a child. Be willing to ask stupid questions, but understand when you have enough information, and it's always long before you really feel like you do.
Hmm. We have about a minute and a half left. And, so you had all this background of Live Better, Live Longer, where you wrote the book, but you mentioned the tsunami. Can you give just a couple of sentences, a snapshot of what this tsunami will look like? And I think this is more of a positive tsunami
Yep,
than
yep.
that we've seen.
Yeah, exactly. It's a tsunami in the positive sense of we'll call it the waves of Nazare, where people can surf the 100-foot wave. So for us, I think the goal over the next several years is to continue to build the clinical story that demonstrates that people using the Twist AID system because of its unique engineering, because of its unique ability to measure drug dosages to 50 billionths of a liter, that they will have better outcomes across the board, short term and long term, than any other device. And I think, in many areas we've seen where the best technology doesn't always win, like, Betamax and VHS is the classic example of that. But in healthcare, I have to believe that at the end of the day, what really matters to people living with these diseases and physicians treating them and the educators and nurses is, what is the clinical outcome for the patient, and how do you make their health better, but also, and I know it sounds so trite, but their life better, because people living with diabetes, they make 10 times as many decisions a day as you and I do, right? The decision about should I go exercise this morning goes, am I going to exercise by running or am I going to lift weights? If I exercise by running or lifting weights, I change the amount of insulin. If I'm going to change the amount of insulin, do I have to change my pre or post workout meal, right? It's like those little, just that one little decision, that's one decision for you and me, is five or six for someone living with diabetes. So we want to try to take that burden down if we can.
Yeah, I commend you on the important work that you're doing. Well, a pleasure speaking with you, and I'm wishing you best of luck going forward. And everyone, just think of one concept that you've heard from Alan, which is when you're making those decisions, a critical thing is how much data do you really need? And sometimes going into the data overkill is just a poor way out. So focus on that, and look, you're making the world a better place by improving healthcare and diabetes for so many people. Congratulations.
Thank you, Robert. Really appreciate it, and happy to be here.
See you all next time. Hello, America.